A few months ago, there was this controversy with Hollywood star John Cena, where he caught some flack for a video that he posted on Chinese social media, where he was apologizing for referring to Taiwan as a country in an interview he did for the Asian premiere of his movie, The Fast and Furious 9. Now, the status of Taiwan is a very sensitive topic in China, and supposedly Cena made his apology to avoid upsetting Chinese moviegoers because his Hollywood bosses did not want to risk a boycott of the movie. Now, although you can see from the title of this video that I ultimately agree with John Cena and that Taiwan cannot be accurately defined as a country, I still think the fact that he had to apologize about it is a little bit silly. What Cena said was really just an innocent gaffe. He's an actor, not a diplomat, and there's nothing wrong with referring to Taiwan as a country in the colloquial sense of the term. And on the surface, for all intents and purposes, Taiwan indeed appears to meet what most people believe a country to be. It has its own government, its own laws, military, currency, the people have their own passports, etc. So why doesn't all this make Taiwan a country? Well, the short answer is,
it's complicated.
And to explain why this is the case, I'm going to have to get into some Chinese history, as well as some concepts of international law and political science. Now, I should say that I am not claiming to be an expert on this topic. I'm not a political scientist or an international lawyer or a sinologist or historian or anything like that. I've actually never even been to Taiwan. I'm just a layman who has long found this topic interesting, and I've read up on it quite a bit, and I've had conversations about it both with Taiwanese and mainland Chinese that I've known over the years. I've just noticed that there are too many Americans who are uninformed and misinformed about this topic, so I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my understanding. Most Americans are under the impression that Taiwan is an independent country, but it is claimed by China, which seeks to annex the island by force. But this is far from being the whole story. In fact, there are 4 different theories regarding the political status of Taiwan, which are going to be the subject of this video. The first is that Taiwan is indeed an independent country. The second is that Taiwan is the territory that is still controlled by the Republic of China, which is the legitimate government of all China. The third is that Taiwan is a territory that rightfully belongs to the People's Republic of China. The fourth is that Taiwan and the mainland are part of the same nation, China, but Taiwan is a territory that is not part of the People's Republic of China. Let's take a preliminary look at number 1, that Taiwan is an independent country. If we're going to be able to either affirm or refute this claim, we need to know exactly what these terms mean. In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there are 2 definitions for the word country that are most pertinent here. The first is the land of a person's birth, residence, or citizenship, and the second is a political state or nation and its territory. Now, Taiwan under these definitions could indeed be deemed as a country, and this is why I don't see too much wrong with John Cena or other foreigners colloquially referring to it as such. But the problem is when pundits like Ben Shapiro or Keith Olbermann castigate Cena and insist that Taiwan is in fact a country, they're saying that in more than just the colloquial sense. They are in fact asserting that Taiwan is an independent country in the same sense that the USA is an independent country, or Japan, or France, or Argentina, or wherever else. But for a country to be independent would mean that it is its own political entity and does not belong to any superior sovereign power. In the case of Taiwan, this would mean that it's not a part of China or any other country for that matter. Political independence also overlaps with the concept of state sovereignty, which would mean that Taiwan's government is the highest governing authority over all of Taiwan's territory. State sovereignty can be de facto, de jure, or it can be both. De facto sovereignty means that a state exercises exclusive authority within a territory, whether or not that sovereignty exists in law. Taiwan, at least to some extent, is a de facto sovereign state. But de jure means that a state has the exclusive right to exercise that sovereignty according to law. The problem is that Taiwan, as a de jure sovereign state, does not exist and never has existed in neither international law nor in its own domestic law. Furthermore, the Taiwanese people and their government have never declared themselves to be an independent and sovereign state apart from China or any other nation. Now, we're going to come back later and examine further this concept of Taiwanese independence. But to explain why at present the island of Taiwan is not a de jure sovereign state will lead us into theory number 2, which is that the government that occupies Taipei, the capital city of Taiwan, is the legitimate government of all China. The state that we commonly call Taiwan is officially the Republic of China. Now, this is not to be confused with the People's Republic of China, which is the country that we normally call simply China. The Republic of China traces itself back to 1912, when a group of revolutionaries, led by a man named Sun Yat-sen, forced the Qing monarchy to abdicate and instituted a new government in the mainland city of Nanjing. But Sun's vision of a strong, stable, modern republic never quite materialized. From about 1913 to 1949, China suffered power struggles, rebellions, warlords, civil war, and World War II. The Civil War broke out in 1927 between Sun Yat-sen's successor, Chiang Kai-shek, and his Kuomintang or Nationalist Party, against Mao Zedong and his communists. Although Chiang and Mao agreed to a ceasefire in 1937 so that they could both focus on fighting the Japanese occupation, the Civil War resumed in 1945, almost immediately after World War II had concluded. Ultimately, Mao and his Chinese Communist Party were victorious, and they established the People's Republic of China in Beijing in 1949. Chiang and the Kuomintang were forced to flee to the island of Taiwan, and this is how Taipei came to be the seat of the government of the Republic of China, which to this day still operates under an amended version of Chiang's 1947 Nanjing Constitution. Hostilities between the factions continued for several decades, but the PRC was prevented from finally taking Taiwan, thanks in large part to the ROC's Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States. Now this is where the question of the legitimate government of China begins. For about 20 years, because of Taiwan's geopolitical importance in the Cold War, the United States and many other countries around the world continued to recognize the ROC as the sole legitimate government of China. However, this changed in the 1970s. In 1971, the United Nations expelled the ROC and gave its seat to the PRC. The following year, U.S. President Richard Nixon made his famous visit to Beijing and met with Mao Zedong. And finally, in 1979, the United States officially recognized the PRC. Because the official policy of Beijing is to reject diplomatic relations with any country that formally acknowledges Taipei, there are only 14 states remaining in the world today which still recognize the Republic of China. This means that Taipei has almost entirely lost any claim to legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. And this will take us into theory number 3, that Taiwan is a territory that rightfully belongs to the People's Republic of China. Now, as mentioned, when Mao's Chinese Communist Party instituted the People's Republic of China in 1949, it succeeded Chiang Kai-shek's ROC as the government of China. The Kuomintang's retreat to Taiwan, and the fact that it has not actively sought to reinstate itself on the mainland in decades, can be considered tantamount to a forfeit of its claims of holding legitimate sovereignty over the territories of the PRC. Today, the Communist Party's regime is overwhelmingly popular with its citizens, who would surely not want to see it replaced with the regime in Taipei, thereby making the PRC's legitimacy and sovereignty not seriously in dispute. However, until today, the ROC has never surrendered, nor have it and the PRC ever agreed to any armistice. So technically, the Chinese Civil War has never ended, and until now, the PRC's constitution claims that Taiwan is part of its, quote, sacred territory. The PRC also maintains that its recognition by the United Nations in 1971, which states that it is the, quote, only lawful representative of China to the United Nations, and its recognition by the overwhelming majority of the world's states, all give legitimacy to its claims over Taiwan. It should be noted, however, that neither the UN nor many of its member states explicitly recognize the PRC's claims over Taiwan. The United States, for example, while formally acknowledging that there is only one China, officially deems the Taiwan issue as unsettled. Thus, the idea that the PRC has legitimate claim to de jure sovereignty over Taiwan is dubious at best. In 2005, the PRC enacted an anti-secession law to further address the Taiwan question. Now, most of this law discusses Beijing's policy of pursuing negotiation with Taipei with the ultimate aim of peaceful reunification. However, it also states that if that peaceful reunification proves impossible, or if Taiwan declares independence, the military option can be resorted to. Because of Beijing's position on this, many Americans are of the mistaken belief that it is the PRC's claims over Taiwan and its opposition to Taiwanese secession that is preventing an independent Taiwan from coming into being. This is not the case, as the independence question is also unresolved within the Republic of China itself. From 1949 to 1984, Taiwan was run as a one-party dictatorship, first by Chiang Kai-shek and then his son Chiang Ching-kuo. During this period, Taipei continued to actively maintain that it was the sole legitimate government of all China. But during the 1980s and 90s, Taiwan began transitioning to a multi-party representative democracy. and this allowed public debate to take place over what the status of Taiwan ought to be. And even politicians from the Kuomintang began softening their stance and showed flexibility on the question of Taiwan's relationship to the PRC. In April of 1991, Taiwan's President Lee Teng-hui announced that the period of communist rebellion was officially over, and he later stated that his government would no longer actively challenge PRC claims over the mainland. And this change in the state of affairs brings us to theory number 4, that Taiwan and the mainland are part of the same nation, China, but Taiwan is not part of the People's Republic of China. While the PRC's official policy under Mao Zedong was to, quote, liberate Taiwan by force, that changed when Mao died in 1976, and Deng Xiaoping took over the main leadership role in the People's Republic. In contrast, Deng emphasized peaceful reunification with Taiwan, something somewhat similar to the one country, two systems scheme that he devised for Hong Kong and Macau. Deng's government also worked with their counterparts in the ROC to establish the 3 links between Taiwan and the mainland: postal service, transportation, and trade. In 1992, a semi-official meeting took place in Hong Kong between representatives of the PRC and the ROC. Although there are no written documents due to the fact that neither party could officially recognize the other, according to personnel from both the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party, a consensus was reached between them that there is only one China, but each side acknowledges that they have disagreements as to what China means. Although to outsiders this may not seem like much, it should not be underestimated that this was in fact a major breakthrough in the peace process between the PRC and the ROC. This 1992 consensus, as it's come to be known, was an important first step toward a mutually agreeable resolution to the two-China problem. The spirit of the 92 consensus is even apparent in the language of the PRC's anti-secession law, which does not explicitly state that Taiwan is part of the People's Republic, only that it is part of China. In 2008, a Kuomintang politician named Ma Ying-jeou became the president of Taiwan. His policy was to pursue rapprochement with the PRC, using the 92 consensus as a starting point. He also emphasized the concept of Zhongguo Minsu, or Chinese nationhood, which in the context of cross-strait relations means that both Taiwanese and mainlanders are heirs to the same millennia-old civilization that predates both the ROC and the PRC. Ma's position was that the relations between Taiwan and the mainland are not like relations between two sovereign states, but rather relations between two regions of the same country. Although neither side can officially recognize the other, the two governments cannot and do not deny the de facto sovereignty that each holds over its respective territory. However, he also acknowledged that despite his stance on this issue, Taiwan's status in relation to the PRC is something that the Taiwanese people will have to resolve for themselves. In 2015, Ma flew to Singapore to meet with PRC President Xi Jinping, the first time the leaders of the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party had met since Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek saw each other for the last time in 1945. At this meeting, the two presidents formally accepted the 92 consensus for its initial progress in establishing and maintaining peaceful relations across the Taiwan Strait. They also both invoked the Zhongguo Minsu concept as crucial for bridging the gap between Taiwanese and mainlanders. But Ma's concept of one country, two regions is controversial, and it's not shared by many of his fellow politicians in Taiwan. And this juncture brings us back to further discussion of theory number 1, that Taiwan is an independent country. In 2016, Ma was succeeded as president by Tsai Ing-wen, who remains in office until now. Tsai is from the Kuomintang's rival party, the Democratic Progressive Party, which holds the position that Taiwan is already an independent and sovereign state. To understand some of the reasoning of the DPP and its faction, we have to go back to a time in Chinese history before both the PRC and the ROC even existed. Now, the Han Chinese are actually not Taiwan's indigenous inhabitants. Taiwan has been the home of various aboriginal tribes, collectively referred to by the Chinese as the Gaoshan, for thousands of years, and who are unrelated to any mainland Chinese ethnic group. In the 17th century, parts of the island were colonized by the Spanish and the Dutch. Soon after that, Hokkien and Hakka Chinese settlers began migrating to the island, and it was formally annexed by the Qing dynasty in 1683. More than 2 centuries later, the Qing ceded Taiwan to the Empire of Japan after losing the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. And the Japanese ruled the island until it was surrendered to the ROC at the end of World War II in 1945. Between 1945 and 1949, there was a migration of about 1 million or more mainlanders to the island, and when Chiang Kai-shek and his KMT made their exodus and established the ROC capital in Taipei, these mainlanders became Taiwan's ruling elite. For several decades, Chiang Kai-shek ruled Taiwan under martial law, and political dissent was violently suppressed. The legacy of this is that there is a divide between Taiwanese descended from those who migrated after World War II in the Civil War and those who are descended from colonial subjects of Japan. In Taiwan, these two groups are called the Waishengren, or Taiwanese mainlanders, and Bengshengren, or Taiwanese islanders. Today, this divide can be seen in that typically the mainlanders favor the KMT and the islanders favor the DPP. The DPP essentially argues that Chiang Kai-shek and his mainlanders never had the right to actually rule over the Taiwanese islanders. They claim that the Kuomintang's 1947 constitution is illegitimate and that it does not apply to Taiwan because it was drafted before Japan had legally relinquished sovereignty over the islands in the San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951. Also in that treaty, Japan never officially transferred Taiwan to either the ROC or the PRC because of the Cold War and the Two China problem. When the Republic of China occupied Taiwan after World War II, and Chiang established Taipei as his provisional capital in 1949, the islanders, who hadn't held any sort of Chinese nationality for half a century, were never given any say in the matter. The DPP claims that all of this makes Taiwan's legal status undetermined, and thus Taipei can already define the island as an independent country if it so wishes, and act as such within the international community. This policy was vigorously pursued by Chen Shui-bian, the first Taiwanese president from the DPP. Chen insisted that Taiwan was an independent country and even tried to apply to the United Nations as the Republic of Taiwan instead of the Republic of China, but this application was denied by the UN. In contrast to Ma Ying-jeou's appeal to the concept of the Zhongguo Minsu, the pro-independence faction in Taiwan believes that despite Taiwan's past links to China, the two of them have been politically separated for too long, with generations being born and raised with little to no connection to the mainland. Therefore, the Taiwanese are now a separate and distinct people from the Chinese, perhaps somewhat analogous to how Americans by 1776 had become a separate and distinct people from the English. This notion of a distinct Taiwanese national identity is most common among Taiwan's younger generation, which is one of the factors why the DPP and its allies have made great gains over the KMT in Taiwanese politics. But despite the DPP's popularity, many opinion polls in Taiwan show that a majority of Taiwanese favor the status quo much more than they would favor either independence or reunification. Because the answer to the political status of Taiwan can depend upon who you ask, whether it be the Chinese Communist Party, the Kuomintang, or the Democratic Progressive Party, it is that status quo that is for now all we can go by. And that status quo says that Taiwan is the only territory left that is occupied by the Republic of China, which lost the mainland to the People's Republic of China over 70 years ago. For now, this status quo will remain for the Taiwanese government and its people, until there is a consensus whether to reunify with the mainland or to declare independence. Right now, no such consensus exists. And so, if the Taiwanese have yet to resolve this issue for themselves, then it's rather arrogant for American public figures like Shapiro and Olbermann to decide for them, and insist that Taiwan is an independent country. Right now, as tensions across the Taiwan Strait are approaching a fever pitch, with U.S. personnel, including President Biden, being committed to defending Taiwan even if that means military confrontation with the PRC, it is a crucial time for Americans to get the real facts about the Taiwan issue. All this gearing up for what could easily become World War III is grossly unwarranted. The truth is that despite the ebb and flow of certain tensions between the ROC and the PRC, since the time of Deng Xiaoping, the overall trajectory of cross-strait relations has been one not towards war and enmity, but towards peace and fraternity, exemplified by the establishment of the Three Links, the 1992 Consensus, and the 2015 Singapore meeting. And therefore, the government and people of the United States can either play a constructive role in helping the ROC and the PRC work out a peaceful resolution to the Taiwan question, or if not, then they ought to just butt out and leave the two parties alone to deal with it themselves.